Hi, I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Glens Common Council Tuesday, February 22nd. And so we can open up, we didn't post our agenda for this meeting as we need to. So I think what we're going to do is just open up to our, right now we have a current open public comment meeting about the lighting law. So we can go ahead and have any public comment. I know we've got several emails where people are continuing to provide comment as we've asked for. We can go ahead and have that public comment because that was the public hearing was scheduled and on the website. So we can have that, and then I apologize. I think what we should do is just move the Common Council meeting, the regular scheduled Common Council meeting for one week from tonight at 7:30.
Mayor, I think the planning board meets at that time too. So
Planning board meets at 4:45 on the first Tuesday of every month.
do you think
There's only one item on the agenda and one sketch plan review that is not noticed to the public, but just comment by the
Okay,
planning board.
great. All right.
Okay.
Awesome.
If you're all okay with that, or so I guess what we'll do is we'll just open up the public comment period to our local lighting law 12022 as attached. Anybody from the public like to comment on this law? Sure, come on up. State your name and your address for the council, please.
Okay. Hi, my name is Matthew Brown, and I live on 50 Walden Avenue.
Hi, Matthew.
And I just wanted to comment. I mean, I understand what you guys are trying to do, and you put a lot of work into it. My concern is that you'll end up with a situation like maybe you have an adjoining campground and you're fighting over where the smoke's going to go. It's just, I have probably 8 or 10 exterior lights, various kinds. I have some that are on security cameras, some that I leave all night long. I have a little bit more of a buffer, even though I'm in the city, which is nice to have, and of course I have a relative that lives next door, so it's good neighbors. But I think that we have to be careful if we make a law that then basically is used as a cudgel against the other party who's now being protected with their rights to be able to use light. I mean, if it's someone's got a flashing strobe or something that's really obnoxious, then yes, that needs to be addressed. But I think that security lighting is pretty ubiquitous, and being that we live in the city, there's certain things that we have to, acknowledge in city life. I mean, we're not New York City, but it's more densely populated than, say, Washington County. So there's a reasonable expectation that perhaps a person might want to consider a cheap window treatment as opposed to getting into an argument with their neighbor, or at least politely say, hey, listen, if you could just aim that in a different direction. I think that's, more what needs to happen. I'm afraid that we have just more laws that are going to really that might be able to be taken care of with something that's already established as far as a nuisance or something like that. I just don't. I think that having too many layers of ordinances can be an undue burden. And I've spoken to a couple of friends whose emails you've received, and there's been some good suggestions as to how to maybe manage it from the perspective of what's actually coming into the property that's offensive as opposed to limiting it to a specific size bulb, because that would grant, as it currently stands or did, every one of my fixtures would then no longer be compliant. Because I have 4 spotlights on my back, and each one of them is 75 watts. So that's a total of 300 watts. I mean, I do dim them in the PM, but there's nothing in the ordinance that would say if you would dim it to a certain amount. And then the wattage itself doesn't really just speak to the lumens, because the wattage is simply the draw on the device. LED fixtures, for example, can run at 10 watts. I mean, I think you put in
equivalent for
lumen equivalent is 800, but is that at the source, or what's the distance away from? As long as we have some
It
clarity.
also says before that the lights are not to be operated as a nuisance. So if it's not being operated as a nuisance, then you can have 100-watt floodlights in your backyard.
So it's tailored to the person who's kind of
And the reason that we have a specific watt threshold in there is because we were concerned that people wouldn't have guidance on what is definitely gonna be something that's absolutely fine.
Right.
So we were putting something specific because we got many people saying, I don't know what is even gonna be allowed now. So we put something in to do that. And you said earlier that, you know, if somebody has a strobing light.
Well, so that, yeah, I mean, I was just saying, for instance, what would be.
We don't have a method currently, which is why we started putting a
And the reason I just mentioned that was just as a delineation to say, okay, you know, lights are to be expected. I mean, nobody's making an ordinance against the sun, for example. And at night, it would seem that the windows are put in people's houses so light can come in, not so you can really see out. So, I mean, I don't know, I have shades on my windows, most people do. That should be at least a mitigating factor. I'm just saying that I just want it to be the responsibility of both parties, not just the person who decides they want security at night. And maybe they live in a section of town that they feel that's well-traveled and they don't know who's going by their home and want to have some sort of security against their property. So that's really it. I mean, I understand you guys are doing good work. I just want to make sure that we're at least taking these things into consideration and doing as little as you possibly have to achieve the goal that you're trying to achieve.
You know, Mr. Brown, initially, the people who did come to the city to ask for help were told, try to work it out with your neighbor, and they really tried.
Sometimes
many of them.
I've had
They
neighbors.
came to us and said, you know, if I lived in Queensbury or many of our other neighboring communities, there would be an ordinance in place that could protect me in this situation, but Glens Falls does not have it in their code. And that's where this is coming from. We're just trying to help these people who came to the city and came to our code officer repeatedly, and the code officer said, I can't help you, we don't have an enforcement mechanism, you need to go through the council to place that there. But we are not trying, we're not trying to stop people from having security lighting in any way. We just don't want them to point their security lighting at their neighbor's window. You can light your own property and angle your light down. That was the intention.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and one of the reasons I'm here is because, you know, if I don't at least speak about it, I can't really say that I didn't voice my concern.
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
no,
Yeah,
we appreciate that.
I can say specifically to floodlighting, we're not outlawing floodlighting. What we're doing is we're trying to put in a mechanism so that people are aggressively floodlighting their neighbors' windows and their yards and
Right.
everything.
Which is
There's a
happening.
mechanism.
Yeah, I
It's
mean,
just happening.
I've seen more and more accent lighting, but normally that's pointed towards the home or something like that.
And that's
You know,
Or even
even-
towards the ground would be nice.
Right.
That's
You know,
all the
and-
law calls for, by the way, is to turn it down.
Yeah, you don't want to be, you know, I have about 50 feet behind me, so mine are pointed out a little bit, but it's another
Yeah.
150 feet to my next neighbor, so.
Yeah.
It's never been an
So
issue for
that's
me.
not, it's,
I do have a next door neighbor that has a light off to the side, but I've never really said anything to him about it. Okay, it is what it is. I just pull my
Sure.
share. Yeah, but yeah, if you have difficult neighbors, I understand. I just figured I'd voice my concerns, and you know, you've answered some of my questions.
Yeah, Mr. Brown, if I could, I'm new with this, you know that, you're one of my
Yes.
constituents, so, you know, I bothered to knock on your door 5,000 times. You know, it surprised me when I came on board here at the common council, how much of an issue this was. I have the issue 2 doors down the street from me that affects my house. And I've never, unfortunately, reached out to the neighbor and said, hey, by the way, could you move this thing down? And maybe I should have. You know, enacting laws is not the most important thing we all do here right now. I think our fiduciary responsibility to make sure taxpayer dollars are spent appropriately comes first.
Well, I get the tax bill, I know.
But enacting laws does too.
Yeah.
And I think it's good that you got another group of eyes, or some new eyes, that are taking a look at this. We are interested in input. I thank you for coming tonight and giving us what you did. And I think that we're still digesting all of that, because if we are going to enact a law, I want to make sure that we enact a law that is fair and benefits the citizens and benefits the city. So thanks for coming.
I can't disagree on any one point there.
Yep.
So thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.
thank you. Would anyone else like to comment to the council? Sure, come on.
Hi.
Would you mind just your name and?
Yeah, my name is Melissa Verberg, and I live on 14 Charlotte Street in the 3rd Ward. I come here because I do strongly support this ordinance. I have gone through all the avenues. As you guys know, the third ward does not have very large plot lines between the houses. Everyone expects ambient light, but then there's light that is distressing and intrusive and invasion of my privacy, both on the first and second floor of my house, my backyard, all the way to the entirety of my backyard. People are shining light. I ask, please just look at this, tell me if you think that this is fair. It causes daily stress. I've been losing sleep. It's like mentally draining me, and I've really tried to make peace with the person that is doing this, and I know I'm not the only person that this is probably happening to. And I know some people say that government shouldn't be the avenue that we take to step in, and maybe we should go to the courts. At the end of the day, I still have to live next to this person, and people having the same issue. We still have to be neighbors and trying to do the most amicable thing, the fair thing. If we're all living underneath the same code of conduct, I would have to show her the same respect. Then I think that's a lot more fair than trying to bring someone to court, cost us money, cost us time, have to take off of work to go to court. This is, to me, like the most utilitarian and fair procedure to make sure that things like this don't happen to anybody. Like I'm not asking for people to not feel secure in their homes. Just, I don't need your light in the second story of my house, in my dining room table, in my backyard when I'm just trying to sit on my porch and enjoy a cup of tea at night and look at the stars. Just please respect my space and I'll respect yours. That's all I say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys can keep that.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak to the council in this public hearing? Sure.
Hi, my name is Matt Webster. I live at 230 Bay Road in Glens Falls. I sent you all a letter a few hours ago. I don't know if you had the opportunity to read through it yet. Is that me?
Sorry.
I'll spare you reading the entire thing. Hopefully, if you get the time, you will. I'm just here to say that, I can certainly empathize with anyone who has difficulties with their neighbor's lighting or anything like that. My neighbor's lighting that I have difficulty with is the city. Street lights light up my entire house. That's exempt in this law. You're not covering that issue. Whereas...
Actually, you could complain about the way that the lights are for the city. You can register it as a problem on the website.
Mm-hmm.
And we do have,
The ability.
we have the ability to adjust that. So
Understood.
We don't know if somebody doesn't let us know.
I mean, it's kind of a given
And
for
we
the
have-
entire city.
Well, we have a contract for an outside firm to come in and make these adjustments with the LED lights that we just rolled out. And the LEDs can be a lot different than what the incandescent lights were too. So
Yeah.
we're expecting to need to make those adjustments. So if you let us know specifically where you're having an issue, we can get that on the list and get that addressed for you.
Understood.
We also, when we converted our lights, asked for the closest thing we could get to dark sky lighting, so they point down. I understand there can be ambient light, but they point down. Even the decorative lights that are round are capped, so there can be a little light that seeps out, but the intention was to light the streets, not to light up into your windows,
Yes.
upstairs in the sky.
And I'm fully in support of dark sky lighting and dark sky lighting plans as well. But this is also a city. We live close to each other. We have lights. I actually did have difficulties with a light that was shining across the street into my house. And I contacted the business owner, it happens to be a business, and they changed the lights. It was that simple. And if they didn't, I saw at your last meeting, there was an actual attorney here who said this is a civil matter. There is civil recourse if you have lighting difficulties. Whereas...
It's shocking to think that an attorney would think that that a resident should have to take someone to court to get satisfaction, doesn't it?
Now that is true. However, this simply shifts the burden from the individual with the problem to the taxpayer. Because eventually this will end up in court. I mean, I addressed in my letter that you say you put a lot of time into this, and I can certainly respect that, but it's incredibly vague. And I read in the Post-Star about how the code enforcement officer was quoted as saying it is intentionally vague to give him all of the discretion that he wants, which is what the city attorney said at the last meeting as well. And to me, that's just downright disturbing. I mean, I don't want individuals to have that much flexibility and that much power. I want a uniform set of rules that everyone has to play by. I personally have had difficulties with this code enforcement officer, issues which don't necessarily need to be discussed here, but which I brought to the previous administration, and they fell on deaf ears because here he is proposing legislation. So, as I said, I have several concerns.
Actually, Chris Vanderzee is not proposing legislation, the common council is.
I'm aware of that, but
He
it was,
assisted with the development of the plan, but it's not his law.
yes, but it was you at the last meeting who said, you know, well, this is what Chris wanted.
No, we
And-
talked, there was a workshop that was held,
Mhm.
as there were many, many workshops in the past.
Which were not publicly advertised, recorded, or transcribed.
That's
And we're-
not, that's not
That's
true.
not true, yeah. I'll let-
I mean, I've checked the website.
So go ahead. It's-
No, we post public notice for
Every meeting.
every common council committee meeting, and in fact, the last one we had, before we put this on the agenda, there was an article in the Post-Star that even said we were going to discuss the lighting law ahead of the meeting. So that did happen.
Yeah, I mean, I specifically sought out clarification on whether this meeting would include public comment for this law on the website today,
Mhm.
and I could not find that.
We have a notification system where we post, which you can subscribe to. I don't know if you knew that. It was called Notify Me. And there's an area called Spotlights, and we send things out to make sure that residents can get it. And the notice of this and the revised law went out. It's also on the city website under latest city news in the city services section.
And also after the last workshop meeting, we posted the revised law up on the website, so you can find it there as, you know, a document.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's my fault that this meeting is not gonna happen tonight at the common council. So just so you know, that one, it is there, it's several places, and the meetings have all been publicly identified, okay? But you're right about tonight, and that's me, so.
Well,
go
no, I
ahead,
think it was
please,
not blame,
please.
it's simply,
Yeah, please share, and we're
Raising
glad to have you
concerns.
share. Go ahead.
And so I guess the final thing that I'd like to highlight, which is also in my letter, is that I would encourage you, if you are going to pass this proposal, which, you know, I'd say there's a lot of issues with, to have some sort of mechanism for beginning the process, rather than having, for example, a code enforcement officer whose judgment is questionable at best, drive around the city and point out violations himself. Why isn't there a mechanism for, okay, a neighbor has provided documentation that they went to their neighbor and they said, will you please remedy this issue? You know, so a neighbor could approach the city at that point and say, here's my documentation. Then the neighbor signs something, you know, a formal complaint to the city, and that begins this process. That way this can't be used as a preemptive tool, if you will, by anyone who may sit in that position.
Well, Mr. Webster, that's actually how the process does work already. Code officers don't drive around the city looking for violations. They investigate complaints that come into their office via telephone or mail or email.
I personally have dealt with Mr. Vanderzee, and my friends have dealt with Mr. Vanderzee, and I'm sorry, but that's just not true. He does actively seek out violations in the city, and that's a conversation for another day entirely. But it would be nice, if you feel the need to codify these things, to codify how this process should work specifically, while you have the opportunity.
That's in our code already. If you look at the section involving the code enforcement officer and the duties of the code enforcement officer, it's all there.
Yes,
Specific to the code office, not each and every single local law that's passed.
well, and that's why I would propose, with this specific law, that you have that documentation to make the city the last resort, rather than the primary resort. Either way, yes, you have to live next to your neighbors, but those neighbors are still going to know that you brought the city down on them. And there's very serious consequences to this. It has 15 days in jail for lighting.
This is very similar to the law for noise. So this is the same sort of thing. So if you
But
look at
noise
it,
laws have specific parameters.
there's specific parameters in here.
There are some, but there's also some ambiguities. And as I said, your code enforcement officer was quoted as saying it is intentionally
Well,
vague.
that was before the workshop in which we made a more specific addition.
And that was in the article about the workshop.
Which was
And
written
then the
before the
workshop took
workshop.
place,
Yeah,
and then there was amendments made,
we,
based upon the suggestions of the public.
exactly. We really wanted to take people's suggestions, and so we talked about it, and Chris did say those things at one point, but we decided to make it more specific. So that is in the amended law.
And there is some specificity. There is, you have a wattage in there. Now, how about lumens over property lines and those specifics? Can you stand at the property line and measure the lumens? Can you compare moonlight to what's coming off your neighbor's floodlights? Because there are going to be very specific cases, and I feel as though, from what I've read, I don't want to unfairly judge your private meetings, but from what I've read,
There's no private meetings,
Yeah,
sir.
there
I mean,
Okay.
why stop now? You already have.
There were several members of the public who were at our workshop. It wasn't private, it was open, they were there, the reporter from the Post-Star was there. I don't know where
Well,
you're getting that from.
again, I don't want to unfairly judge, what you've put into this, because you say you've put a lot of work into it,
Well, thank you.
and I respect that. But also on the final page, you cut off, I assume, the last word of the proposal as posted. It ends with SEPARA. So just a simple proofread might help next time.
Okay, well, thank you for your
All right.
suggestion.
I would also,
I think there was one thing else in your letter. You were saying that this was only applicable to residencies,
Mhm,
but that's not true because the non-residential
mhm,
places
mhm.
are bound by site review. So if they make changes and they're not consistent with the site plan,
Mhm.
then they're in violation. They're already in violation.
And that's good to know, and I appreciate you reading that and answering that question. I mean, your last meeting almost seemed a bit combative, when Mr. Borgos stood up to speak, and some of you almost seemed upset that, you couldn't just pass the law tonight and move on. So I'm glad that this is, becoming a more protracted process, and that there's actually some thought going into it, as opposed to just passing a law that can end up with 15 days in jail for lights.
And
Yeah.
could I just interject something here?
Mhm.
Not too long back, I was a citizen just like you, and I really didn't have a lot of information that's going on here.
Mhm.
The comment that you just made that, it looked like, we were deer with headlights in our eyes at the last meeting, because the public showed up and they asked some questions, and we were looking disgruntled, like, geez, we won't be able to ram this thing through tonight.
Mhm.
I just got done telling Mr. Brown, I think you're one of my constituents as well, if you live at 230 Bay Street, in the second ward. I'm not sure how far, what numbers go up there. But as I said to you, this is one of the most important things that your elected representatives do.
Mhm.
And I don't know anybody on this council who doesn't take this job very seriously, isn't concerned about what other people think. We are concerned about what other people think. I myself have been labeled as, just another elected official. But you know what? I'm a citizen first.
Mhm.
I can't take my citizen's hat and say, I want it this way, I don't care what anybody else thinks.
Understood.
And like I say, I just object to that statement that we look like we were going to try to railroad this thing through, because that was as far from the truth as anything that's been said tonight.
And I can appreciate your sentiment on that, and I appreciate that, you've stated that. I was just offering my observations. I was only able to watch the YouTube video. Unfortunately, I couldn't be here. I would also urge that you potentially keep this public hearing open through the next meeting, because as I said, it wasn't on the website. So perhaps there are other people who may read about this, who may see this, who may have an interest in speaking their piece and making sure that their city resources are being used wisely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to join, to address the council? So,
I have two letters I need to read into the record by request of the constituents. They
Great.
specifically asked me to read them, so. Okay, I think these might be the people you were referring to earlier when you said you had gotten letters from people you knew, but, okay, so the first one says, to the Glens Falls City Council. As members of the Glens Falls City Council, you are about to adopt a new law which has the effect of banning all exterior light fixtures over 60-watt incandescent equivalent on all residential properties. This law only applies to residential properties. It does not apply to commercial, not-for-profits, and municipal properties. The mayor has said this is necessary because of complaints to him in the previous council between next-door neighbors who have been unable to compromise when there is light trespass from one property to the other. The mayor and code enforcement officer have said the code will only be enforced when there is complaint where neighbors can't come to an agreement. How can we be sure of that? That is not in the proposed code. Instead of coming up with a code which could only deal with light trespass from adjoining properties, the Building and Codes Committee created a law that will only allow a light fixture with the equivalent light of a 60-watt incandescent light bulb, the lumen equivalent of 800. You know that lights someone has on the eve of their two-story house, it will be illegal regardless of bulb size because no light fixture is allowed over 10 feet. What the committee didn't do is create a code which considers both the complaint and the property owner using light to provide safety and security on their property. The one picture that was provided by my councilman at large shows an illuminated driveway by use of floodlight mounted to the building which is shining on the neighbor's property where it looks like the homeowner has an addition that is very close to the property line. This is a good example of where there could be a code adopted for this specific type of trespass, not one that applies to all lighting on residential properties. I'm asking the council to permanently table this overreaching law. Have the codes committee come up with a compromise which would only deal with the matter at hand, disputes between property owners. It could require motion activated with a short duration for the example of the driveway light in the photo. I assume the higher the light, the more coverage is obtained, which is probably the only one light was used for the driveway in the photo. Where there is offensive light trespass, you can have a height limit. It may mean the property owner puts multiple light fixtures along the path. I ask this proposed law be permanently tabled or outright rejected by the council. And that's from Nicholas Collins.
I want to just address a couple of things in Mr. Collins's letter. First, that section 3 says operation as nuisance is prohibited. That's the first thing that we should be considering with this, is that we're not going after people saying to take down your 75-watt bulb or 100-watt bulb, but we're saying that a 60-watt bulb is more reasonable as you know, as standard for lighting and that kind of lumen equivalent, but only in the case of that the operation of it is a nuisance to another resident. The 10-foot thing, the actual section 4H reads, lights on poles shall not be taller than the building whose area they illuminate, nor taller than 10 feet. So this is lights on poles. This doesn't have anything to do with a second story light. That was two things today.
thank you. Do you have another, you want to read into?
Yeah, well, I told my constituents that I would, so I'm going to, and this is a long letter, so please bear with me. This is from Mike Borges. He says, Diana, thank you for talking with me at length today about the revised Chapter 129 lighting. As discussed, I am writing this email with the request that you read these comments into the record during the public hearing since I cannot attend. More than just making a record, I truly hope that you and the other members of the Common Council table any consideration of a vote on this this proposed law until such time that it is revised and amended further to incorporate additional input and changes based upon that input. When I appeared at the first public hearing on the originally proposed law on February 8th, I had only heard about the proposal from a friend who saw it in the Post-Star article. That article left me with the impression that there were only a few isolated issues. Over the past 2 weeks, I have learned from your comments and from others that the city has been dealing with this for more than 1 year and has more than a handful of complaints directed to elected officials and code enforcement. I know that your committee has worked hard to come up with this proposal law and intends on adopting something in order to provide your code enforcement officer with a local law that he can enforce to deal with those complaints. I appreciate that factual scenario, and as you explained to me on our call today, the stated intent of the city is not to prosecute every residential property owner and force a retrofit of existing light fixtures. Rather, it is a tool for code enforcement to use when a property owner fails to comply following a neighbor complaint. While I appreciate your good intentions to help the residents who are not blessed to have the great neighbors that I have, I offer the following comments on the newly updated proposed local law. First comment. The addition of section 4B stating that no light fixture or lamp shall be greater than the aggregate of 60 watts incandescent or lumen equivalent if other bulb type is a very specific standard that addresses my prior comment about lacking objective standards. However, it is very limiting and overly restrictive criteria that I believe would result in substantial majority of residential properties to be in non-compliant status and result in other unintended consequences. It may also prove to be unenforceable from a practical construct. Based upon your stated intentions of not planning to go out looking for warrants to enter upon residents' properties, I don't see how the code enforcement officer could reliably obtain the evidence necessary. You told me that the city attorney included this specific language after finding it included in other municipalities' lighting laws. I am not aware of any discussion or studies or assessments conducted by or on behalf of the city of Glens Falls that resulted in a conclusion of your committee or consultant that this objective standard was deemed to be appropriate for Glens Falls. I am familiar with the available exterior lighting fixtures that have been sold at the big box retailers, Ace Hardware and online retailers. There are hundreds of options to choose from, but a larger number of them have multiple sockets for a screw and bulb. As the proposed law anticipates, since incandescent bulbs have largely been phased out for more efficient technology such as LED, the lumen equivalent is truly the more relevant measurement that should be in the proposed law. The generally accepted equivalency of a 60-watt bulb is 800 lumens. If we accept that figure as correct, this law would make it illegal, punishable by a fine of $250 or up to 15 days in jail, if a resident installed two 60-watt bulb equivalents into a two-socket fixture. Since you have made it clear that the city is really trying to alleviate the issues of light trespass upon a neighboring property, why does the law focus on the light source rather than the light that trespasses onto a neighboring property? Shouldn't the statute be written to measure the number of lumens that actually constitutes the trespass infraction and is measurable at the property line? Isn't the light trespass the offense, not the type, style, or size of the fixture and illumination source? If you're intending to protect the neighbors, the measurement really needs to be taken on the neighbor's property. That will require a rewrite to state where and how the measurement would be taken, and I would think that the lighting industry professionals or professional engineers would be able to easily provide you with the terminology for the metering device utilized to reliably allow the code enforcement officer to take that measurement. This would also eliminate my concern that a code enforcement officer would need a warrant from a judge to enter the property of the allegedly offending property owner to examine the light source in question. It also would eliminate my primary concern that this law would be making a substantial majority of residential properties to be in violation. The law should only apply to situations arising from an actual light trespass, and that's where the focus should be placed as a condition precedent to application of any objective measurement. Number 2. The Glens Falls Planning Board has a wealth of experience and expertise in this area. I recommend that you affirmatively make a referral to them of the proposed local law to get their input. Additionally, affirmative publicity about the proposed law should be undertaken to solicit input from all residents since all will be impacted. As we discussed, there is a resident of the 3rd Ward who contacted you and informed you that he is a professional planner who has experience writing local lighting laws with specificity. I'm sure someone like him or a professional consulting firm can provide the expertise to provide examples of what various light levels are for your committee to review and make a recommendation to adopt. I have made a decidedly unscientific review of what's available on the shelf at Lowe's, Home Depot, Ace Hardware. Most of the new fixtures are LEDs with much higher light outputs than 800 lumens. Lumen levels really depend upon fixture type and intended use. A porch ceiling fixture may have a few options for screw-in bulbs, and you might have a few options for similar for new post lights and coach lights, but the majority of the security lights designed with motion sensors and commonly referred to as spotlights are sold as LED with very high lumen outputs. Has your committee discussed an exception for security lights based upon motion sensors? If so, what length of time might a light remain on after a sensor is tripped? If so, what level of light is appropriate in that situation? 800 lumens seems low if you're trying to illuminate a backyard to discourage a trespasser. What about 2 or 3 bulb fixtures? Is 800 lumens acceptable per bulb? How is that different than 3 separate fixtures or 10 separate fixtures at 800 lumens versus 1 fixture with 2200 lumens? I believe this provision can be improved to provide for measurement at the property line, so it really is simple for the enforcement to occur. Just measure the light that actually crosses the property line from whatever light source is actually used on the neighbor's property. The light doesn't have the owner's property and result in trespass. Why should anyone care about their fixture choice of lumen output at the source? We should also be concerned about problems presenting by the vast array of existing light fixtures as well as the new ones being developed in the future. Many of the homes in Glens Falls still have original light fixtures. It's likely to expect that a law mandating replacement of existing fixtures would be an economic hardship on the residents. Again, I don't believe that's your intent since you're really focused on solving the problem situations where there's actually light trespass upon the neighbor's property. Number 3, focusing on the property line assessment will also eliminate the need to include sections in the law on seasonal holiday lighting. Number 4, there is no mention of exceptions or waivers being possible. Why is there no exception or exclusion from the law for security lighting with motion sensors? A motion sensor can be added to a fixture and can continue to serve the valuable purpose of deterrence while operating for only a very short period of time, usually less than 5 minutes. Safety and security concerns are very legitimate. Was the Board of Public Safety consulted? Why or why not? Was a determination made? As I mentioned in our call, this is number 5. As I mentioned in our call, I agree with the comments made by professional engineer Tom Center at the workshop committee, who was there as a member of the public last week. He proposed this law be placed in the zoning code. I agree that makes the most sense for people looking for it and for enforcement purposes, and to provide an appeal process prior to court with an appeal to the ZBA if either party disagrees with the determination of the code officer. That process is already part and parcel of our zoning code, and these provisions can be easily integrated into it. The penalties can also be set to mirror similar zoning code violations instead of making it an offense punishable with jail time, which seems to me inconsistent with the offense. Number 6, the installed height limit of 10 feet also doesn't seem to be appropriate. We have thousands of lights existing on garages and houses and eaves. Shouldn't be de facto illegal by passage of this law. Again, if the law contains the allegation and presumptive finding of light trespass measured at the property line as a condition precedent to application of the lumen limit, then the application of the lighting standards, including the height limitation, begins to make more sense as a solution-oriented goal of compliance. The goal being to elimination of the annoying light trespass upon the neighbor's property, not simply the fact that an exterior fixture is installed above 10 feet or has a higher lumen output at the source. Just like the cutoff fixture design criteria, unless the goal is to have every resident retrofit their property immediately or face fine or jail time, the focus should be squarely upon whether objectionable lumens or light fall upon a neighboring property. Number 7, the city has several social media channels with which to promote awareness and should be using them to raise awareness of not only the proposal but going forward a public information campaign to for social media or other city-sponsored events can educate residents and encourage them to make conscientious choices when replacing exterior light fixtures in the future. Due to the substantive changes made to the proposed local law since the original public notice, I believe the current amended law version or any subsequent amended version is substantially different and requires compliance with public notice requirements. I understand that those affected residents don't want to see a delay in having this proposed law adopted. However, I urge you not to rush a law without further revision and public promotion of what's being discussed. This is the law as written currently, will impact every residential property owner. That's very significant, and another 30 to 60 days is a reasonable trade-off to achieve a better law with fewer unintended consequences or legal challenges due to procedure or content. I've copied the mayor and the rest of the council
Thank you.
Thank you for your patience. I did speak with Mr. Borges at length, and he asked me to read his comments into the record.
Well, that's,
Yeah.
understood.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
If no one else has any public comment, then we'll close the public hearing, but leave the public comment open to the city for people to send us emails or comment any way they wish to. We'll postpone the regular city council meeting for next Tuesday. I believe that would be the 30th? March 1st. So we'll have it Tuesday, March 1st. We'll have the next meeting at 7:30. We will not have a separate public hearing, but we will obviously open every meeting with public comment period, and then we'll go from there. All right?
I have just the last comment I want to
Sure.
make is that, I mean, I think we've had some progress because in the first meeting, Mr. Borges felt this law was unnecessary. Now he's saying he sees that, you know, it is necessary. We have reason to think it's necessary, and he's requesting that we make some changes. I think all of us are open to input, but we're also sensitive to the fact that the people coming to us for help have been waiting for months. So I would like to see us consider all of these comments, perhaps bring in more expertise if necessary, but really do this in an efficient way so that we can get some relief for the people who have been waiting and coming to the council for help.
Agreed.
Diana, excuse me, when, I was not on the committee last administration, and I know you started, the previous council started working on this. How long ago was that?
Well, we started actually drafting the law several months ago, but we started receiving the kind of complaints and tracking them before we actually started engaging in drafting the law. But I did ask Zoe today if she could pull all the times that I mentioned this on the record in public comment, and she did that for me. And I did mention it several times, kind of at length, going back to last fall, you know, through several times in the last administration and this administration. So I don't have the date of when it first arose on the committee, but our first step was just kind of gathering the data before we started drafting.
The need is there.
Yeah.
Sure.
I think, and I'd like to just give this comment. I think we get all wrapped up in the process. We're not representing our citizens well if we get wrapped up in the process, although the citizenry occasionally drags us back in that direction to discuss the process. And I think, as I said before, this is important. We're going to enact a law. And it does take time. And those who have got problems out in the city, I understand their frustration. But at the same time, like I said, it's a very important thing. We need to do this right. We need to get the input. I did also, and you just said that, I think Mr. Borges has rethought some of his standings on it, because initially he said it shouldn't be a law. And now he's come back and said, well, I guess it should be a law, but he's got some other ideas on it.
Yeah, which I think demonstrates a lot of willingness to collaborate on both ends.
Sure.
Ours and the public.
And
that's the goal of this process.
the need for public hearings.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
Do you think we should get the planning board involved, take a look at the law?
Well, we have a architectural consultant that we use to work with the planning board, and I will speak to the chair as well and get their input. It's not something, you know, that it's not within what they would normally do, but certainly we can ask for input from many different people.
Yeah, or our city engineer, perhaps.
City engineer,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, thank you, and so we'll end this public hearing, and I'll see you next week, and I apologize, this is all me. Thank you.
thank you.